Well, as I mentioned in the last video, there is a lot more to do here. We could just geek out to our heart's content with all this gear on this vehicle. We could really just add every little thing, but I don't know that that's really feasible for a game object. And honestly, it's time to move on in terms of this course. So please feel free to add anything else you'd like to your vehicle. Really, there isn't any other pieces on here that don't involve some sort of technique or tool that we've already covered. So if you've come this far, you have the tools and the skills to add whatever else you want. But, as I said, for this course, it's time to move on to the next part of the process, and that is UV mapping. But before we do that, let's of course do a little housekeeping. Let's go ahead and join these together. I'll just right-click and join these here. It looks like we've got some extras out here, so let's hide our collections here, and then let's select all of this, just the lights and the fenders, and then let's press M and move them to the vehicle main. All right, so if we bring back the wheels and the vehicle here, this is what we want to UV map, and there's a lot to this, but we can break it down into its component parts, and I think it can go fairly quickly. Now, one of the reasons, again, that I kept the mirror modifiers on a lot of these pieces, like, say, the doors here, is, of course, if I wanted to do any changes on one side, the other side would automatically update. But also, for the UV mapping, we can actually make our textures a little more efficient by just UV mapping one side and then duplicating it over to the other side, and that will actually save space on our UV map. And I'll show you what I mean as we go along, but just know that we're going to be using the mirror modifier in the UV mapping process as well. So first of all, let's begin with the actual cab here, this main piece in the center. And let's go over to our UV editing screen layout up here. There we go. And maybe I'll move this over a bit, and it looks like when we came over into UV editing, it switched us into edit mode. And what I'm going to do is tab into object mode again, and I'm going to hit the division key on the numpad right here, and that will try and isolate that piece. There are a couple of pieces still hanging on, so I'm going to hit that division key and hit it one more time. And there we go. That kind of cleans it up, so we only have that one piece that we're working on. Now, if we want to bring everything back, of course, we just hit the division key again. So let's hit that division key one more time and tab into edit mode. And if I recall, we have a mirror modifier on this as well. Now, yeah, so we're going to need to apply this. We can't apply it in edit mode. If we hit apply here, we get this error that modifiers can't be applied in edit mode. So we'll tab into object mode and hit apply there. Now, there's some things that we can do to kind of clean this up. There are things that we don't need here since much of this is going to be hidden. We could, for example, alt-click this edge here and get rid of it completely. So let's hit X and dissolve edges, and that will reduce the poly count on this just a bit. Also, we could get rid of these faces here behind the doors. We're not going to need those, so let's delete those. And I'll go around to this other side and do the same thing. There we go. What else do we not need? Let's hit the division key again. And, well, down here, we don't really need the polygons on the bottom there. So hit the division key. And let's select this face here and delete that. So as we're UV mapping, we're just going to keep an eye out for polygons that we can remove and make the mesh a little more efficient. All right, so let's start UV mapping this. Now, if I just hit the A key and hit U, I would bring up the UV mapping menu, and I could just click Unwrap. And that kind of works, but there's a lot of problems here. There's some stretching going on. There's some overlap here. You can see these kind of pulling areas here. We need to do a little bit better with UV mapping this. And in fact, we can take a look at the problems if we create a new window up here. And I'll change this to a shader editor. And I'll hit the N key here. And what we can do is create a new material for this object. Let's just click New up here. Now, you can also come over here to the Materials panel and click New here as well. It does the same thing. And when we do, we get this Principled BSDF shader. And what I'd like to do is add a checker pattern onto this so that we can tell if there's stretching happening in the UV map. And if there's stretching happening in the UV map, there's going to be stretching in our texture that we apply to the UV map. So we don't want that. We want to reduce the stretching as much as possible. So let's create a new node up here with Shift A, and I'm going to create a texture image texture right here. And with this, I'm going to create a new texture, a new image right here. And let's call this UV test texture. And I'm going to keep it at 1024 by 1024, which is fine. And instead of a generated type of blank, I'm going to choose a UV grid. And let's see what happens. If I click OK, there's our UV grid. You can see it there. I don't really want it here. I want it over here. So what let's do is take this color right here, drag it over to the base color there, and nothing yet. But if we middle mouse button click and drag over here and change to the look dev, now you can see that texture there. And look how stretched and warped it is here. That's not what we want at all. So we're going to need to work on this a bit. Down here, I'm going to come over and just click on the X to remove the UV test texture from this view. It's hard to see the UV islands with the texture in there. So I'm just going to click here. Okay. Now, what are we going to do about this? Well, what we need to do is actually create seams and tell Blender how to split it apart so it'll lay out flat a little better. It's like a piece of clothing, like a shirt. There are seams in it that allow two-dimensional patches to be sewn together to cover a three-dimensional figure, right? There are seams on a shirt along the side, around the shoulders, maybe underneath the arms, and all of those seams are just connecting flat two-dimensional panels that ultimately are shaped into a 3D object. So that's what we need to do here. So I'll go back to my solid view here, right here, so I'm not looking at that test texture. We can switch back and forth easily just to see how it looks. So what let's do is let's start creating seams. We can come up here and go to Edge Mode with the 2 key and begin selecting edges. Let's just say we select these edges right here. And let's press Control E to bring up the Edge menu. And you can see right here is Mark Seam. So let's click that. And now we've got these red highlights along those edges. And that means that's where Blender is going to break that out into its own UV island when we UV map this. So let's just see how that looks. If I hit A to select everything and then press U and unwrap, there it is right there. So I can click this. Well, we're in vertex mode here. Let me middle mouse button click and drag that over. We can change this to island select and click here, and that'll select that whole island. We can hit G and move it around. We can hit R and turn it. But let's go back over here to the look dev view. And now if we take a look at our checker pattern on that piece that we just split out, it looks pretty good, right? It's not stretched, it's pretty flat and even. All the checkers are evenly sized. That's good. That's what we want for this whole piece. And that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be assigning seams to our objects and UV mapping it so that it will lay out flat in the UV editor over here and allow our checker pattern to be even and unstretched. So we'll continue that in the next video.